Picture this: the Comanche tribe of the 1600s, making a move from the north to the southern plains. But here's the kicker: they didn't just relocate, they dominated their new turf, thanks to an unholy alliance with horses in the 17th century. Now, history usually paints a grim picture when Native American tribes crossed paths with Europeans: domination, slavery, and death. Yet the Comanche had a different story to tell, at least for a time. They're not your typical tribe, often dubbed the most brutal of all. Their captives? Well, let's just say they faced unspeakable horrors, and hope was their only lifeline. In the wild Texas of the 1800s, there was this seriously tough tribe of warriors, the Comanches, who scared the pants off everyone, settlers and other Native American tribes alike. From the early 1800s to the 1870s, these guys were no joke. They pulled off ruthless raids and used brutal tactics, like scalping and other gruesome stuff that would give you nightmares if you crossed their path. One of their big-shot chiefs, Quanah Parker, led these folks with some serious grit and clever strategies in their last stand against westward expansion. These Comanches knew how to mess with people's heads, using the sheer horror of their methods to freak out and break down their enemies. Scalping, which has been around forever, was just one of their messed-up tricks. They were famous for leaving behind mutilated bodies, making sure the memory of their attacks haunted folks long after they disappeared into the plains. These Comanches were like something out of a horror movie, and we're taking you into their world of terrifying raids, where fear was their deadliest weapon. Now let's talk about how these Comanche folks got their start. They've got a super cool history that goes way back to the Great Basin region in North America. By the early 1700s, they'd moved down to the southern plains, which covers parts of today's Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Their journey was all thanks to them snagging some horses from Spanish colonists, which totally transformed their society and turned them into one of the most hardcore Native American tribes around. With their new horsepower, they could change up their hunting game and expand their turf, hunting buffalo and trading with other tribes and European folks. As they grew in power, the Comanche warriors became legends on the plains, known as the Big Shots, who rocked it in battle and on horseback. The Comanche way of life was all about family. They had these extended families living together in small groups on the move. Every now and then, they'd all come together for big events like the yearly buffalo hunt or the Sundance, a religious shindig to honor the spirits and make sure life stayed good. They were all about family ties, and your social status was based on how much you helped the group out. Warriors and hunters were the VIPs in the crew. Roles were pretty clear in Comanche society. Women ran the household, did the cooking, and took care of the kids. The guys, though, were all about hunting and protecting, and they got really good at riding horses and fighting. And here's the cool part: even women got in on some of the action after a battle, taking care of the captives. So, yeah, the Comanches were a tight-knit crew with a whole lot of history. The Comanches were all about that warrior life, and it was tied to their belief system and love for Mother Nature. They had a whole gang of spirits and supernatural beings in their playbook, with the big boss spirit, Numina, running the show. To get their mojo going, warriors would do rituals and ceremonies, bringing out sacred stuff and lucky charms for good vibes. They had this unwritten rule book called the Comanche Code of Honor, which was like their guide to playing fair in battles. It was all about being brave, loyal, and making sure their people and way of life stayed safe. As these Comanche dudes expanded their turf through some seriously aggressive raids on their neighbors and European settlers, they got a rep for being fierce and ruthless. These raids had all sorts of reasons behind them, like snatching up horses, loot, and prisoners, or just showing who's boss in disputed lands. One rockstar Comanche leader, Quanah Parker, was all about these raids. He led his crew with a mix of skill, smarts, and charisma. But here's the downer part. During these raids, some captives had it rough, and some even took their own lives. But not everyone got a raw deal. Lots of captives, especially women and kids, became part of the tribe and were seen as VIPs. As European settlers kept pushing west and stepping on Comanche toes, things got heated, leading to what's now known as the Comanche Wars. With new toys like guns in the mix and the buffalo population dwindling, the Comanches started to lose their edge. By the late 1800s, they had to give up their big territories and switch to reservation life. But you can't forget their warrior legacy and never give up attitude, which left a big mark on the Wild West's history. The Comanches' rise to power? It was all about those wild raids that flexed their muscles and made them famous. They did it for territory, stuff, and settling old scores. The Comanches were all about that expansion game, and it drove their wild war raids. Picture this. Their crew was getting bigger, and their hunting grounds were getting emptier. So, they went on a hunt for new digs to keep up their nomad lifestyle. They hit the jackpot when they rolled into the southern plains of North America. It was like a paradise for them, with wide-open grasslands and a ton of buffaloes to chow down on. But here's the twist. These new spots weren't empty. They had to duke it out with other tribes like the Apache and Osage, who were also fighting for a piece of the pie. With everyone scrapping for space and goodies, the Comanche brought their A-game with war raids. It was their way of telling the neighbors, "This is our turf now." Now, speaking of goodies, the Comanche had a thing for horses. Those four-legged speedsters were like gold to them. They'd go on raids to snatch up more horses from their neighbors or even European folks. In Comanche society, horses were like a status symbol, and raiding for them made the Comanche warriors look like the coolest kids on the block. And it wasn't just horses. They wanted weapons, stuff, and even captives during these wild missions. But here's the kicker. They knew how to use those newfangled firearms they swiped, which helped them stay on top of the game in the region. Revenge was also a big motivator for these raiders. In the Comanche's warrior world, honor was everything. If someone messed with them, they'd come back swinging. If you attacked their village, killed their warriors, or swiped their horses, you better watch your back because they'd be coming for you. Take Nocona, for instance. He was a big shot. Comanche chief who went on a spree of revenge raids against the Texas Rangers in the 1850s after the Rangers wiped out a Comanche village. But it didn't stop there. The Comanche had beef with other tribes and European settlers that went way back. They held grudges like pros, and that cycle of violence lasted for ages. One epic feud was between the Comanche and the Apache, and it started in the 1700s when they both wanted to be the bosses of the southern plains. It was a never-ending battle, with each side trying to pay back past slights and humiliations. It was like a wild, old-school rivalry that just wouldn't quit. The Comanche folks were all about those war raids, and they didn't mess around when it came to capturing people. They'd scoop up both fighters and regular folks, and what happened next varied big time. So these raids were like shopping sprees, and the main goal was to grab whatever they could get their hands on: horses, stuff, and people. When they nabbed enemy fighters in battle, it was no joke. The Comanche were like masters of the horse and had mad fighting skills, so they'd overpower their foes, no sweat. But it wasn't just warriors they took. Nope. They'd snatch up non-combatants too, like women, kids, and old folks. This happened a lot when they hit settlements or rival tribe villages. Once they had their captives, it was time for a long, painful march back to the Comanche camp. I'm talking hundreds of miles of misery. How these folks were treated during this journey depended on a bunch of stuff, like how important the Comanche thought they were and how they got caught. If you resisted or looked like trouble, you were in for a rough time. But if you seemed chill, they might cut you some slack, hoping you'd play nice. Now, when they finally got to the Comanche camp, things got complicated. For women and kids, it was a mixed bag. Some saw them as a big win because they could be part of the tribe, boost the numbers, and make the Comanche stronger. Captured women might even become wives to Comanche warriors, or get adopted as sisters or daughters by other women in the tribe. Believe it or not, sometimes they actually got along and chose to stick around. Kids who were captured usually got adopted into Comanche families and grew up like regular tribe members. They'd learn the language, customs, and how to be a Comanche, eventually becoming indistinguishable from their new family. Some of these adopted kids even ended up with top positions in the tribe, like Cynthia Ann Parker, a settler's kid who was captured and later became the mom of the famous Comanche big shot, Quanah Parker. Now, for the dudes who got caught, things weren't so great. They were seen as more of a threat and didn't fit in as easily. Some had to deal with tough treatment or do grunt work for the tribe. But wait, there's more. Ransom talks were a thing too. Sometimes the Comanche would try to swap their captives for cool stuff, like horses or other people held by rival tribes or settlers. These talks were like a dance, with both sides trying to get the best deal without losing too much. It all came down to how valuable the captive was and how well the two sides got along. Back in 1840, there was this wild showdown when some Comanche bigwigs rolled into San Antonio, Texas. They were there to bargain for the release of a bunch of European folks they'd nabbed. But this meeting, called the Council House Fight, turned into a full-blown brawl. It got so bad that some Comanche chiefs bit the dust, and it just made the Comanche and Texan settlers even more ticked at each other. Now, while the Comanche were known for being hardcore warriors and crazy good at riding horses, let's not sugarcoat things. They had some pretty dark stuff going on in their society. Their brutal ways of punishing and torturing their enemies were a real part of frontier life, and it was all about showing who was boss. Let's talk about scalping, which is often linked to the Comanche. This was no joke. It involved cutting a piece of a person's scalp while they were still alive. Yeah, it's as gruesome as it sounds. Now there's this author, S.C. Gwynn, who tells the story of Cynthia Parker, or Nuda, as she was known in her Comanche family. He throws her crazy story into a mix of scalping, raiding parties, and brutal revenge that was going down in the mid-1800s. He kicked off the tale on May 19, 1836. A gang of Comanche raiders rolls up to the Parker Ranch in Frontier, Texas. They basically take over the place, demanding a cow to sacrifice and directions to water. The women and kids smell trouble and hightail it out the back door, running into fields, dry riverbeds, and open land. As for the guys, they try to be nice, offering food and all, but the Comanche turn on them. It's gruesome. They get attacked and torn apart in front of their family. Cynthia and her mom, Lucy, manage to run away with her 4 siblings, but the Comanche catch up, surround them, and snatch Cynthia away from her mom. It's brutal. Gwynn paints the picture. The Indians caught them, forced Lucy to surrender 2 of her children, then dragged her, the 2 remaining children, and one of the men back to the fort. Meanwhile, those who stayed behind to face the Comanche, well, they suffer the same fate as many other folks on the frontier at that time, agonizing death. Gwynn lays it out. The logic of Comanche raids was straightforward. All the men were killed, and any men who were captured alive were tortured. The captive women were gang raped. Some were killed, some were tortured. Babies were invariably killed. The Parkers didn't catch a break either. 4 male family members got pinned down with spears and scalped. Anyone who tried to run got savagely attacked, and it was a nightmare all around. Here's the deal. In another messed up story, Gwynn talks about a brutal attack on another settler family. The Comanche grabbed a pregnant woman who was about 9 months along. They dragged her away from the cabin about 200 yards out. It's horrifying, but they gang raped her and then shot arrows into her when they were done. And if that wasn't enough, they scalped her while she was still alive, slicing the top of her head off. She somehow survived that hellish nightmare for 4 days. One word, brutal. Even a pregnant woman is tortured. But wait, let's go back to the story of Cynthia, who's known as Nautda, or Found One. She ended up marrying a Comanche big shot, Pita Nocona. Over the next 24 years, she became a full-blown member of the tribe, having 3 kids, including the famous Quanah Parker. Now, let's talk about the Comanches' dark side. They were infamous for coming up with some seriously twisted tortures, and usually it was the women in charge of this messed up process. I mean, these folks roasted American and Mexican soldiers alive over open fires. Others got castrated and scalped while they were still breathing. And if you thought it couldn't get worse, they'd bury captives up to their chins and cut off their eyelids so their eyes got fried by the blazing sun before they starved to death. Oh, it gets worse. Some captives were spread-eagled and butt-naked over a bed of red ants, and that was after they'd removed certain body parts and shoved them in the poor guy's mouth, then sewed his lips shut. There's more. One group went all out, sewing up captives in rawhide and leaving them out in the sun. As the hide dried, it squeezed the life out of the prisoner. It's like something out of a horror movie. As the 1800s rolled on, the once mighty Comanche, who'd ruled the southern plains for generations, hit a bunch of roadblocks that basically led to their downfall. From relentless pressure from American settlers to losing territory and getting forced onto reservations, the Comanche faced a storm that changed their history forever. One big reason the Comanches lost their mojo was because American settlers started showing up in their hood, looking for new stuff and chances. These folks believed in manifest destiny, thinking it was their divine job to spread across the continent. As they moved deeper into Comanche land, they messed up the Comanches' usual way of life, using up their resources for food and survival. The settlers also brought a bunch of violence with them, clashing with the Comanches over land and goodies. While the Comanches used to scare the heck out of their enemies with brutal raids, they were now outgunned by the U.S. Army's better weapons and tactics. The Comanches had to give up more and more land as they kept losing, and things weren't great within their own tribe either. More contact with Europeans messed up their traditions and split them apart. Plus, European diseases hit them hard, making it even tougher to fight back. So they had to sign a bunch of treaties in the mid-1800s, handing over lots of land in exchange for protection and stuff. But those deals didn't really come through, and the Comanches had it rough. In 1875, the last Comanche groups got forced onto reservations in present-day Oklahoma, ending their reign over the southern plains. Life on the reservations was nothing like their nomadic days. They had to give up their old ways and start farming while learning American customs. But there was one Comanche leader, Quanah Parker, who tried to make the best of a bad situation. He was the son of a Comanche chief and a Texan captive. Quanah became a symbol of strength and change, trying to keep the Comanche culture alive against all odds. As the last Comanche chief, still roaming free, Quanah eventually gave in to U.S. authorities and led his people to the reservation. There, he worked hard to make their lives better by pushing for education, jobs, and keeping Comanche culture alive. And that's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed our trip back to the time where Comanches dominated the southern plains. They were indeed the most brutal among the Native American tribes we all know of. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.